Welcome to today's class. Yesterday, we started looking at the course Public Policy and Employment Relations, and we want to pick it up from where we left off yesterday. Or in the last class, I beg your pardon. Today, we are supposed to start from the topic. So this is where we stopped yesterday. I was supposed to start from policy analysis, but let me just quickly do a quick review or a quick recap of what we did yesterday. So we started looking at public policy and employment relations. And we said public policy is an institutionalized proposal or a decided set of elements like laws, regulations, guidelines, and actions to solve or address relevant, like real world problems. And they are guided by conception and often implemented by a various system of programs. And we said these policies govern and include various aspects such as education. It could be policies for healthcare. It could be policies for employment, policies for financial management. It could be policies for economics. It could be policies for, transportation, and what have you. So all of these things are policies and systems that are used to manage and govern. So this is what we call public policy. All right. So we proceeded yesterday about public policy. We said it can be considered to be the sum of government's direct and indirect activities and has been conceptualized in various ways. So we did a general review of what that is in terms, what public policies is. And we said it's not an easy something that, a law can just be passed like that. No, in public policy, for a policy can be put together or implemented, it has to go through various procedures, various systems, and where there has to be several considerations before, a situation can become a policy or a circumstance can become a policy. Okay. Public policy is whatever government chooses to do or not do according to what Thomas Dye said, and we examined that yesterday. Then we proceeded to talk about public policy making and implementation. And we said public policy making is a time-consuming system. It's time-consuming because of the various cycles and procedures that must be followed and that must go through before you can come up with a policy. So we looked at agenda setting, social construct of the problem, because the challenge of the problem must be clearly understood. Then you look at policy stream. We looked at policy stream, we looked at problem stream. And after that, we looked at the issue attention cycle. And what is issue attention cycle? We said the issue attention cycle is a concept developed by Anthony Dons in 1972, where problems progress through 5 different stages. Yes, these problems reinforce how the policy agenda does not necessarily lead to policy change. Okay, so the fact that there's a problem and that problem has been brought forth does not mean it's going to definitely lead to a change. So we said there's a pre-problem stage. This is where the problem is recognized by the public or the media. Then we have alarm discovery and euphoric enthusiasm. This is where, something is identified as a problem, supported by awareness by the media to pursue the seriousness of the problem. It is seen, it is lauded. Then realization of cost, which will be incurred by the solutions. Okay, you look at these solutions that we want to bring about. in terms of solving that problem? Is it worth it? Is it worth forming a policy out of? What are the cost benefit analysis? Okay. Then after that, you look there, after some time, there's a decline in public interest because there are some other challenges or problems that may start attracting the general people, and they may not even focus on what is happening again at that particular point in time. Then issue slips off back down on policy agenda. So all of these are what we looked at as what we call the issue attention cycle. Then we looked at public policy formulation, legitimation, implementation, enforcement, the implementation gap, which we said is a period and stages that a policy must go through before an authoritative decision is reached at that time. Okay, then composition, criticism, and policy studies. Okay, so let's quickly, instead of spending the whole day doing a review, I've done a quick recap. So we're going to start looking at policy analysis. And we said in the contemporary era, there has been a massive influx of policy analysis. However, there's no evidence to suggest that this influx has aided to solving policy issues. Distributive theory claims that legislatures in reality have little use for information that pertains to the policies they vote on. It has been determined that instead of certain fields having a higher concentration of information and analysis, it is rather competitive issues that are focused on more. The same report this was determined from also reported that information and analysis also seem to affect issues over a long period, and thus ineffective at reactionary action plan. So the generally there are influx of an attempt to solve problems, okay, where there's a desire to form, there should be a policy on that, there should be a policy on that, there should be a system, which is true, but policies, being that policies are not formed overnight, may eventually take a lot of time before you can come up with an adequate system. So let's look at policy design. Policy design entails conscious and deliberate effort to define policy aims and map out that policy instrumentally. Policy design proposes critical analysis of policy instruments and their implementation. Okay, uncertainties and their implementation. Uncertainties policies designs face include. So there are many uncertainties that are usually faced when it comes to discussing and managing issues of policies. So first of all, technical difficulties. There are technical difficulties, mechanism, the design, constituent, environment. I said yesterday in our last class that when we're talking about public policy, it is not a classroom where there's a problem and you just say, or one small community where there's one little problem, where everybody has, similar beliefs and everybody's like, it's communal. And so it's easy to just take a decision. No, their policies can be very technical sometimes because of the multifaceted aspect that needs to be dealt with. So mechanisms, design, constituency, environment, all of these things are factors that have to be considered. So it makes it a bit technical. Religion also adds to the twist of it, location. Okay, then costs, resources, and material products. Policies can be expensive. Yes, policies can be expensive to come up with. So then political problems, selection process of solution and decision making. Policies require tedious and rigorous research on advice and its feasibility and legitimacy. So you want to make a policy now, you may need to do a lot of consultations and even visitations, okay, before you can uh, uh, know how to manage a situation. So in policy, you may need to do research. So a team of those who are in charge, or a committee who are supposed to come up with a policy, may have to do a lot of travel. So maybe if it's a northern problem, a policy wants to be formed that will have to affect the nation. There have to be travels and research and wide consultation. You have to consult possibly with the traditional rulers. You have to invite maybe Christian association, Muslims association. If it's a education problem, you have to invite school boards, for discussion, stakeholder meeting. If it's a finance thing, you have to look at financial sector. If it's food and agriculture, you have to consider location, you have to consider seasons, and all of these things require extensive research. You have to consult with experts and professionals in those fields. So you see that the dynamics that is involved in making that decision can be very, very challenging. So political problems, compliance, understanding target audience, and getting them to see that that policy will go far and of course will be complied with. Then effectiveness, there's possibility of spillovers, complementariness, and inconsistencies. No matter how much there's a desire to to see that there's a perfection in getting policies may also have inconsistencies. Policies may also have wrongs in themselves in how things are done. It may not be perfect and give the best of results. Okay. Then compliance and effectiveness, there's possibility of spillovers, complementariness, and of course inconsistency. Nevertheless, policy design will help to a large extent to solve that particular problem that may be lingering, which with it comes intricate and multi-level approaches, but it is necessary for good, careful policy design to be considered before implementation. So, and of course, talking about another topic, data-driven policy. And this has to do with information. Data-driven policy is a policy designed by the government based on existing data, evidence, rational analysis, and use of information technology to crystallize problems and highlight effective solution. Data-driven policy making aims to make use of the data and collaborate with citizens to co-create policy. Okay, so earlier on the 2020s, policymakers will use data for policies and public service design while responding to citizens' engagement demands. Okay, so data sets really merge between government agencies or with agencies and countries of government. This is the beginning to change since, of course, we had the pandemic. Forecasting and creating data models to prevent the propagation of the virus has become a vital approach for policymakers in governments around the world. So, in essence, what we are saying is, data-driven policy is the in thing now. Why is data analysis programs selling so much? Because data analysis give you an empirical knowledge and sure knowledge concerning how to deal with matters with evidences, with assuredness. So if I take out a statistical analysis of a situation right now, the vastness of what has happened in the past and what is currently happening will give me insight and information. So let's assume we want to take a decision on political matters right now, and we'll start looking at the data of politics, let's say in Nigeria, for the past 5 years, and study the trends and study what has been happening. Now, this generally will give us guideline on how to effectively make decisions because we are studying based on what we call data. Okay, so let's look at user-centered analysis. User-centered analysis. So user-centered policies are policies that are designed and implemented user-centered policies are policies that are designed and implemented with the end users or those who are impacted by the policy as co-designers. Policymakers use this design process, utilize users' knowledge of their lived experiences. This can allow for policymakers to focus on including both comprehensiveness and comprehension within policies to aid clarity for end users, such as workers or organizations. So we're talking about user-centered policy design. So user-centered policy has to do with giving consideration for the end user. And the end user are those that system is going to affect, or those that when the policy is implemented, they are going to be within the sphere of those that will be affected. So policy makers and policy design have to consider those are at the forefront of as the receiving end of this situation. So this can allow policymakers to focus on including, comprehensiveness within their policies for factoring those that will be the end recipients, okay, of this. So small system dynamics model is a model for condensing and simplifying and understanding complex issues relating to policies. Then we have evidence-based policies, which is associated with Adrian Smith, because in 1996 Presidential Address to Rural Statistical Society, Smith questioned the current process of policy making and urged for a more evidence-based approach. Okay, so that evidence-based approach is more like we can relate it to use of data, evidence, use of something that is empirical that we can be sure. So some policy scholars now avoid using the term evidence-based, using such as evidence-informed, instead of saying evidence-based. So the language shift continues and brings about continuous thinking, underlying desire to improve evidence in terms of the rigor and quality. Okay, still the language of evidence-based policy is widely used and as such can be interpreted to reflect the desire for evidence. Okay, and as such by ensuring systematic and rigorous, high quality, relevant evidence. So the development of analysis of evidence or informed policy are supported by multidisciplinary systems to give proper information. So this course is public policies and industrial relations. I want to quickly look at the second aspect of it, which is industrial relations. So because of our time. Now, what is industrial relations? Industrial relations or employment relations is an academic field that studies employment relationship, the complex interrelationship between employees, employers, labor, trade unions, employer organization, and the state, or what you may want to call the government. So there's a thread that runs through these various organs that we have mentioned. We've mentioned employers, we mentioned employees, we mentioned labor and trade unions, we mentioned employer organization, we mentioned the state. So all of this happening within those various places, okay, is what we call employer. It's what we call employment relations. So the relationship that exists that draws a connection between all of these. Now, the new name from industrial relation, which is more of an old term, is now employment relations. And it's increasingly taking precedence because industrial relations is often seen to have relatively narrow connotation. Nevertheless, industrial relations has frequently been concerned with the employment relations. While some scholars regard or treat industrial or employment relations as synonymous with employee relations and labor relations, it is controversial because the narrower focus of employee relations. So some academics and universities and other institutions regard human resource management as synonymous or one with any of the above discipline. So, knowledge is evolving, and industrial relations to employment relations, and now to more recent terms and broader perspective as human resource, human resources, human resources. So let's look at what we call theoretical perspective. Now, industrial or employment relations, such scholars such as Alan Fox have described three major theoretical perspectives, which we're going to be examining lastly, the three major perspectives on the topic that construct the understanding and the analysis of workplace relations. Now, the three views are generally known as unitarism, pluralism, and the radical or critical school. Each offers particular perspective on workplace relation and will therefore interpret such events such as workplace conflict, the role of unions, and job regulation differently. The perspective of the critical school is sometimes referred to as the conflict model, although this is somewhat ambiguous, as pluralism also tends to see conflict as inherent in workplaces. Radical theories are strongly identified as Marxist theories, although they are not limited to these. So let's look at the three various perspectives in understanding employment relation. The first is pluralist perspective. The first is the pluralist perspective. Now, in pluralism, the organization is perceived as being made up of powerful and divergent subgroups. In pluralism, the organization is perceived as being made up of powerful divergent subgroups, each with its own legitimate interest, loyalties, and with their own set of objectives and leaders. In particular, the two predominant subgroups in the pluralist perspective are the management and the trade unions. And the pluralist perspective also supports that conflict is inherent in dealing with industrial relations, since different subgroups have different opinions in a day-to-day operations. Consequently, the role of management would lean less towards enforcing and controlling, and more towards persuasion and coordination. Trade unions are deemed legitimate representatives of employees. Trade unions are deemed legitimate representative of employees. Conflict is resolved through collective bargaining and is viewed not necessarily as a bad thing. Then let's quickly look at, so in this pluralist perspective, conflict and challenges are not viewed as bad things, okay? Trade unions are, they are representative of employees, and because they are representative of employees, conflict can be resolved through what is called collective bargaining, and it's not viewed as a bad thing. Yes, so, I mean, whatever issues, they are solved. Then unitarist perspective. Now, the organization is perceived as an integrated and harmonious whole with the idea of one happy family. Yes, in which the management and members of the staff share a common purpose by emphasizing what we call mutual cooperation. More like, guys, let us work together to see how we can achieve our goal and aim. So the trade unions are deemed necessary since the loyalty between, Furthermore, Unitarianism has a paternalistic approach. It demands loyalty of all employees, and is managerial in its emphasis and application. Consequently, trade unions are deemed unnecessary. Yes. Since the loyalty of employees and organizations are considered mutually exclusive and they cannot be two sides of industry. So conflict is perceived as destructive and results in poor management. So in the unitarist perspective, they say, oh, we are one happy family. We are working together as a team. We are working together to achieve a common goal. And they view conflict as something that is bad, as something that is conflict comes because of poor management rather than that conflict will definitely occur, and systems can be put in place to effectively manage this conflict. Okay, so and cannot that is how the unitarist perspective view employment relations as one big family, as those are they should be cooperation, working together. Conflict is not a good thing, and therefore, if there's conflict, it's because there's poor management. But well, that is their view. Unlike the pluralist perspective that we looked at earlier on, which of course give room accommodation where there could be challenges within the work environment, but it's supposed to be managed. Okay, conflict can actually be there. So the role of management should lean towards enforcing, controlling, and managing persuasion and coordination. Okay, and whenever there's conflict, it could simply be resolved through what we call collective bargaining. Then we have the radical or critical perspective. And this view of industrial relations looks at the nature of the capitalist society where there is a fundamental division of interest between capital and labor, and sees workplace relations against this background. This perspective sees inequalities of power and economic wealth as having their roots in the nature of the capitalist system. Conflict is therefore seen as a natural outcome of capitalism. What is capitalism? Where if individual has a right to pursue wealth and the factors of production are in the hands of people, whereas not necessarily in the hands of the state, like socialism. Conflict is therefore seen as natural, thus inevitable, and trade unions are a natural response of workers to their exploitation by capital. While there may be good periods of acquiescence, the Marxist view will be that institutions of joint regulation would enhance rather than limit management position as a presumed contribution of capitalism rather than challenge it. So what are we saying? Basically, when you have a capitalist society, it's a society where the factors of production are controlled by people. Yes, not necessarily controlled by the state or the government. And so every individual has right to own land, to pursue wealth, as they, are on their own. And there's no limit to how far they can pursue and get these things. So, and they say if you view society and workplaces like that, then conflict definitely are sure to happen. Of course, conflict is a natural occurrence when it comes to capitalism. So this perspective in inequalities of power and economic wealth as having their roots in the nature of capitalist economy. So in essence, the critical perspective of employment relations views workplace as a capitalist system, okay, where there could be highs and lows, there could be work together, and there could be challenges, okay, and so it is only natural that upon that there will be challenges which will be eventually resolved in the workplace. So, and this is where labor relations come in. Labor relations or studies a field that can have different meaning depending on the context to which it is used. In the international context, studies human relations with regard to work in its broadest sense and how this connects to questions of social inequality. Yes, it explicitly encompasses regulated historical and non-Western forms of labor. Okay, so it tries to remove social inequality where people are treated as humans and are treated fairly. Okay. So generally, you may have different forms of application of labor unions in different countries, in different states, but at the heart of it all, you see that the essence of labor relations of labor union is to better the lives of citizens, better the lives of employees, so that there can be, growth and improvement in their work and in their welfare. And even the employers will benefit, the employees will benefit, and in the long run, the government will benefit and make society better. So it's more like each person, labor must is standing in to speak for the employees so that they are not marginalized, they are not cheated, and they get what is due them. So in all, this is what this course entails: public policy and employment relations. Go do more of your research, and wishing you all the best.